Welcome to the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be right back. Do you feel like the healthcare system is failing you? That's because it is, working exactly as intended to prioritize profits, bureaucracy, and big pharma, while leaving you and your family vulnerable when you need care the most. We understand your frustration. You've been asked to trust a system that feels rushed, impersonal, and biased. You deserve better. That's why we created Gold Care. Here, your values matter, your choices matter, and most importantly, you matter. Gold Care is more than a solution. It's a revolution. Trusted by over 10,000 members nationwide, we've built a system that puts your wellness first. With ethical, independent doctors who work for you, not the system, you'll have access to care that's transparent, trustworthy, and aligned with your values. We understand that stepping away from the familiar can feel daunting, but staying in a system that doesn't truly serve you is even harder. That's why Gold Care offers a healthcare alternative designed to work for you. Whether you're ready to step away from the system entirely or prefer to keep your insurance while seeking the transparent care, ethical doctors, and education you deserve, it's time to stop trusting a system that's failed you. Take control of your health with Gold Care. Join today for just $10 a month and become part of the healthcare revolution. Gold Care, built for you, powered by freedom, trusted by thousands. So let me tell you about today's guest. Shaz Khan is a London-born Swiss-Indian creative designer, researcher, lifelong information seeker, essentially a critical thinker and person who has really dove deeply into vaccine histories. She graduated from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design with a Bachelor in Product Design. She added to her education with certificates and courses in nutrition, marketing and communications, anatomy and physiology, immunology, and vaccinology. After months spent in libraries and national archives, she was very disturbed to uncover the largely undisclosed safety history of vaccines and the documented but heavily underreported scope of injuries acknowledged by health authorities. Shaz publishes content on healthsciencesimplified.com, and she continues to share research and insights with the public. Her commitment to the truth, freedom, and the preservation of health is the driving force behind her new book, The Ultimate Vaccine Timeline. This is something that most doctors are not familiar with. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show, Shaz Khan. So it's great to have you here, Shaz. It's very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's so interesting, your background. So you come really kind of as a creative person, a free thinker kind of person, and then you turned so much energy and interest in the medical space, and then later vaccines, of course. Were you interested? Were you a person who was like a frustrated doctor? Like, where did that all come from?
Well, actually, it's interesting. Just before I went to university, I actually thought I was going to go into biology. And then in the English system, you do your A-levels. And I started my first year of A-levels in biology, and something just didn't sit right with me. So I went back into the arts. And that's what I studied for for 4 years. And then I came out and did 20 years working in marketing and design and communication, always kind of with a science background, because I actually worked for a cosmetics company who prided themselves on the science behind their cosmetics, which I later found out wasn't so solid. And then through personal health issues, I just started investigating more into nutrition, into healthy lifestyle for myself. And then vaccines came onto my radar in 2015 after the death of my father. He was given a flu vaccine and basically died about 2.5 months later. And I didn't find out that he had a flu vaccine until after he died. And I just found it strange because he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, but in hospital he had all kinds of neurological issues, no respiratory issues whatsoever, and something just didn't add up for me. So when I found out that he got the flu vaccine, well, my first thought was, well, should he have gotten a flu vaccine? If he had stage 4 cancer, he would have had stage 4 cancer already in November when he got his flu vaccine. He died in the beginning of February. So I just started reading the package inserts for the flu vaccine and was actually quite horrified to see that neurological side effects were actually acknowledged, and not even that uncommon, actually. So that started my questioning of vaccines specifically. And I started off with reading books. Obviously, Dissolving Illusions was a big one by Dr. Suzanne Humphries and Roman Bystrionic. And then from there, I decided to go to the libraries and to find out whatever I could on a historical level to find out, well...
I'm going to pause you there because that was amazing. That was very interesting. But I don't know if you are aware how unusual you are. I've been a doctor a long time, and I don't know that I ever met a patient who put together that a person got a flu shot a couple months earlier, had neurologic symptoms, started questioning why did he even need the flu shot. I just want to acknowledge that shows a much more curious mind than the average person. And I will admit to you that as an ER doctor, I've given hundreds or thousands of flu shots in my career because the nurses would just sort of make it part of the protocol. So technically it comes under me. But I noticed within the first 2 or 3 or 4 years of my practice that everyone I ever admitted into the hospital with influenza had taken the flu shot. So I remember thinking, well, gosh, this thing doesn't work very well. I wasn't really thinking about vaccines, but I was observing in real time, this thing is garbage. Since then, I've learned a lot. But you had more curiosity than I did. And I just want to acknowledge that because that's amazing. So was the first question for you, the first thing that didn't make sense was because why are they giving a vaccine to somebody who's stage 4?
That was my thinking, because stage 4 doesn't just, come up and suddenly attack you within a few months. I would imagine stage 4 cancer, he'd had it for at least, maybe a year, maybe more. He wasn't someone who went to the doctor very often, so it's true it wasn't something they could have picked up early on, but it just didn't sit right. And the fact that he had neurological symptoms in hospital but was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. He was a non-smoker, by the way. It just, for me, if someone, I mean, I've seen people who've had stage 4 lung cancer
Do you
and they can't
think that he
breathe.
didn't actually have stage 4 lung cancer? You think he died from something else?
I
No.
This is the NHS UK system, so I don't actually know what his death certificate in the end said, that he died from basically multi-organ failure, because they said he was that far gone that he had metastasis in his liver, etc. But at the time I saw him in hospital, which would have been beginning of January, so 2 months after he had his flu shot, there it was all neurological symptoms. He had problems with speech, he had problems with balance. He went into hospital being able to speak, and then within 24 hours lost the ability to speak. And he had all kinds of weird symptoms, and they were treating him with steroids, but he didn't have respiratory issues, which for me was, if you have stage 4 lung cancer, you have respiratory issues of some kind, and he didn't have any. So there were so many things that just didn't add up. And then the flu
Right.
vaccine was like, okay, well, maybe that triggered his downfall. Well, was that maybe something that he shouldn't have been given? And it's funny, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys was well for the flu vaccine, that she started asking questions from her kidney patients. So it's funny that the flu vaccine, as normalized as it's become with yearly campaigns, it's a pretty problematic vaccine, in my opinion.
So interesting. So I'm reminding everybody who's listening that if something doesn't seem right to you, maybe it isn't right. And so that's very interesting. So you do a dive into the flu vaccine, and then you kind of broadened into vaccines in general because I guess you're very alarmed at what you're discovering.
I was alarmed and also very uninformed myself. I mean, obviously, I was one of those who believed that vaccines had eradicated smallpox and had helped us eliminate polio. So those are the two vaccines that I then went to, because those are the kind of like the foundation of the whole vaccine campaign, of those two specifics. And obviously, dissolving illusions goes very much into that. But I think I was more curious to find out, well, what is actually in the archives? What is there actually in the library? What do the government documents actually say about these vaccines? Because she was highlighting doctors were already warning against the smallpox vaccine back in the days and all the injuries that were followed, yet they still continued vaccinating despite the very crude science that we had back then. And that, I guess, I'm a geek, so I love books and I love reading. So the library just seemed the logical next step for me. And I learned how the library networks work, how the National Archives work, how, the process you have to go through to get certain requests to documents that are classified. And I basically did that in the UK and Switzerland primarily.
Wow. So can you share with us, this is a world I am unfamiliar with, how going to the original sources, how that enlightened you, or just some examples of things that you learned that the average person or even the average doctor doesn't know?
Well, it's interesting. For me, it's like storytelling. I like looked at it as a detective kind of task where I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, smallpox vaccine, what were the problems that were highlighted? Who was highlighting them? What did they do to fix these problems back in the days? And what was in the smallpox vaccine? Because that remains a mystery, what the first smallpox vaccines actually contained. And some of the documents that I found, obviously, you know, just there were different reports from the government saying that vaccines save lives, the same kind of discourse that we hear now. But what I found, what I started with were some early Lancet articles that were cited in Dissolving Illusions, and I kind of spanned out from there. And seeing already in medical journals that acknowledging the neurological effects, because that was the main one, was neurological encephalitis issues that were acknowledged after smallpox vaccine, and then also a little bit later in the mid 20th century, provocation poliomyelitis, so polio as a result of vaccination. And then I accessed through the National Archives classified documents that there were the meeting minutes between the Joint Commission on Immunization and Vaccination in the UK, which I think is the equivalent of ACIP, and the Royal Commission on Civil Liability, who were investigating the side effects. And what I saw was in their internal communications, like they acknowledged that there was serious neurological effects and deaths after vaccination, smallpox being one of the main ones early in the days, and acknowledging that they were happening. I think some of the statistics they had was like 1 in 33,000 cases in children who were being affected. There were also obviously adults who were being affected by encephalitis following smallpox vaccine. And then the most shocking document that I found in my research, in any case, that kind of triggered me to want to write a book and put this documentation in a format I could share, was in 1977 when they acknowledged that screaming to fits in babies was a sign of brain damage. And that text was edited down, and I actually have the original document with the handwritten notes that basically cross out screaming to fits equals brain damage. And just they generalize it. I can't remember off the top of my head what they generalized it to, but that page is in the book. That kind of shocked me because it was like a deliberate attempt to cover up injury, and in the meanwhile not admit it in the public realm and do anything to investigate why vaccines are creating neurological damage and to make them safer.
Wow. You know, okay, so hearing that through the ears of an emergency physician, I've heard that so many times from families over the years that there'll be, oh my God, that's like heartbreaking for me. That, you know, they vaccinate their child and then they describe that it was totally inconsolable, shrieking, screaming, crying, and the child's never been the same. I heard that enough to know that it was linked. I mean, there was no way, but that they had this and that they knew it and they scribbled it in and then they suppressed it. And the other thing that's very heartbreaking for me as a doctor is when a child would come in or dead, and then we would be diagnosing SIDS, there was always just a hint of guilt swirling around the parents. Like the parents had secretly killed the child. That would happen a lot. You know, the police sometimes would come talk with us and they'd ask us, well, what do I think? Do I think that the mother secretly suffocated the child? I mean, that was kind of, I don't know if it was like that in the UK. I can tell you that in America, if we put SIDS on, you know, on the diagnosis, there was a smoke of suspicion around the family. And okay, wow. All right. Can you share the name of your book and how people can find it?
So it's called The Ultimate Vaccine Timeline. People can find it. It's available in the US on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, also in a digital format in Apple, I believe. In Europe, it's going to be released in the beginning of July, so it's not quite out yet, but it'll also be available in your major retailers. And I think it's also available directly through the Skyhorse and Children's Health Defense website.
My book was just published by Skyhorse too, my latest book. But do you put in copies of some of these original sources, like pictures of them?
Yes, I have some original. I haven't put the complete documents in. The complete documents will be available on the website, which will also be available on July 4th to coordinate with the European release date. So I've put pages, some certain pages, specifically that one I was telling you about, the Royal Commission on Civil Liability, that I've included with the cover document and the reference, if anybody wants to go to the National Archives and see it. But I will make available the complete document that is linked to that specific issue. I've also put certain letters that I found, which were in these folders, which I do remind viewers were classified up until the time I declassified them in 2018. There are still many documents from the 90s which are still classified. There are lots of documents about compensation for medical professionals who were injured by vaccines, which is still confidential. I couldn't get access to that. They denied my freedom of information request on that one. So yes, anybody who's interested, I've put the documents. That was the idea of doing this book, because this is to share this documentation and also give context around. I mean, it's a timeline, so it's very fact-based.
Yes. Do you go over many vaccines, all vaccines, small, like, is it?
I go over as many as I can. I haven't gone too deeply into, like, for instance, yellow fever vaccine, Japanese encephalitis.
But typical ones like in the American Childhood Vaccine Schedule, MMR, that's I was being very American focused on that. Wow, this is really a tremendous service that you've done for humanity. I look forward to owning the book because I think it's important. So interesting. How has this process changed your life? I mean, just diving deeply into this. I mean, it's for me for the last 5 years, discovering that a lot of what I thought I knew was incorrect or was told to me through a lens where a lot of information was excluded. You have to kind of have a sense of solidness, stability in yourself to not get rocked by the knowledge that, for example, your government has been lying for years or forever. So I'm curious on the human level, like how has this kind of changed you going forward, or the process?
I have to admit, it was a very unpleasant experience. I think anyone who goes through this experience of realizing, hang on a minute, I think our authorities lied to us, or at least they didn't disclose a lot of information, was very unpleasant. And in trying to have the conversations with people around me who I knew either worked in science or in medicine, wasn't always easy. I've lost quite a few friends on the way, I have to admit. It is what it is. But people who can't enter into a real dialogue. Like, I wanted to bring scientific papers to a friend of mine who had a PhD in immunobiology, and she just didn't want to talk to me. I think it was because I didn't have a PhD after my name or any kind of medical background. I think she didn't see me as a peer. So she didn't want to enter in any conversation with me, which I found very frustrating because she's a friend I've had for over 20 years. So it was difficult on a personal level. There was some tension between my partner as well, who thought I was a bit crazy. But
Right.
I have to say, COVID actually has allowed me to find people who were open to these conversations, who themselves were going through that process, because COVID was like a slap in the face for many of the medical professionals here in Switzerland who had a lot of trust in their government officials and suddenly weren't allowed to treat patients. So those conversations have been incredibly enriching. But the process itself, I have to admit, you have to be pretty. Like, I had nothing to lose. Like, I'm not a parent even, so it wasn't even like I had to make a decision for my children. It was literally just for myself, and then to share this information with my family, and then they do what they want with that information. But it wasn't easy, because I was also dealing with the grief of losing my dad, and then that quickly turned into kind of like anger, like he should have never got that vaccine. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what killed him, but I'm certainly quite sure that that's helped him decline quite rapidly. And I see, pregnant women getting the flu vaccine. Now they're recommended the COVID vaccine, RSV vaccine, and DTP pertussis, which is not even that effective.
Yeah. I know a lot. Oh my gosh. So, first of all, your story is a little bit like our Secretary Bobby Kennedy's story. So I don't know, it should maybe give you a little bit of heart. He was actually an environmentalist kind of lawyer, and a lot of moms kept coming up to him and saying this and saying this and saying this, and he finally had to look at it. And then he was shunned, by his family, by his party, by everybody. But he had to research what he knew was a story behind it. So you stand in very good company. It can be a lonely road, but you've literally done a gift for humanity. I don't know if it's some consolation. It's very hard for me, and it's frustrating for me as a doctor to watch other doctors refuse to be educated. So, for example, DTP is one. DTP is one. The fact is that the pertussis, I don't know which part interests you the most, but the pertussis component is not effective, and it's essentially spreading pertussis with asymptomatic people. So it just boggles the mind that that's what we're doing. Diphtheria doesn't need a vaccine at all. Tetanus, you probably just need one. And that's one we don't even talk about. That's just an ordinary kind of vaccine. So this timeline, so nobody's really, how did you declassify documents? It caught my ear when you said that. Like, do you just petition the government?
Yeah, you make requests. When you go to the National Archives in the UK, basically you have to identify the document you're looking for, the folder. In my case, it was the minutes from the Joint Commission of Vaccination, Joint Committee, sorry, of Vaccination and Immunization. And then they show you the documents that they have, and then you make a request for it, because it will say if it's closed or if it's open. Closed obviously means classified, and it says usually up until what date it's closed. So some of these were closed up until like 2030 or something like that. But you can make requests even if it's closed until a certain date. And then based on your request, they'll either release it or they won't. And I had quite a few requests that were accepted and then some that were rejected.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but this is just out of my own curiosity. I had recently been educated a bit on polio. And I've known for a long time that really the only polio that exists in the world is from the vaccines. But I'm just curious if you have an opinion on the polio vaccination campaign that we did in America. I don't know if it was in Europe too, in the 60s, I suppose. And
mid-50s.
Mid-50s, and the spread essentially, and the potential of pesticides contributing to that. I don't know if you have an opinion on that. I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't, but if you do, it's not a subject I've talked about ever.
Well, polio was, I think, the most interesting vaccine, because as an infectious disease, it doesn't have the same kind of history like everything else does, where, they have very high incident rates in the beginning of the 20th century and they kind of like taper down. So polio kind of appeared out of nowhere in the early 20th century. And there's a very good book by Forrest Meady, and the name escapes me. But he talks about the pesticides that were used and the potential implications that had on children and the development of poliomyelitis. Then Suzanne Humphreys touches on the fact that they changed the definition of polio when the vaccine came out. So that definition on its own would have reduced the amount of cases that we diagnose as being polio, with or without the vaccine. And the same thing happened in Switzerland. We started our polio vaccine campaign in Switzerland in 1955. We imported Eli Lilly into Switzerland and we started vaccinating in the schools. So our campaign started pretty much at the same time as in the US. And it was interesting, but I found out by accident as well that the biggest polio epidemic that we had here in Switzerland was in the year that we mandated smallpox vaccine on kids. And I thought that was interesting. Obviously, provocation poliomyelitis, what were the implications? The doctors knew that there were some dangers of injecting in certain times of year. Also, don't vaccinate a kid who's recently had tonsillitis or had their tonsils taken out. So polio is a very interesting one to look at also for not only the definition of polio itself, but the definition of being inoculated. And I believe it was Meadow Bailey who pointed out that already, sorry, not Meadow Bailey, excuse me, my names sometimes escape me, but the quote's in the book. And he mentions that people who got polio within 10 days of being vaccinated were considered unvaccinated.
Right.
And obviously we know that happened during COVID. So we see how history repeats itself. And if we continue to repeat history without learning from our mistakes, then it's just going to go on. But yeah, polio is a very interesting one, because I do believe that it was very much linked to pesticides, potentially other environmental toxins that weren't looked at whatsoever.
Well, that's interesting what you said, though, about the slope, because you know more about this than I do. So how it was higher in the beginning of the 20th century and they, kind of tapered, but polio was kind of more of a sudden peak. And when you see that kind of unusual distribution, normally a scientist would look at that and say, it may not be this, it may be that. And then everyone goes radio silent. It's very frustrating. By the way, as per your comment about your ex-friend who didn't think you were her equal, this is very funny. I like to remind people that I have 2 doctorate degrees, and it actually doesn't matter. They still don't want to talk to you. They just use that as the pretext, which is very funny. I know you know that, but I just have to remind you.
I came to realize that when they were criticizing people like yourself and then Peter McCullough and all these people were very highly esteemed scientists with long careers, and they're being
right.
Insulted and dismissed. I was like, well, okay, all right, then I shouldn't be surprised that I am, and I've got nothing to lose. I haven't got a reputation to protect.
A pretext. It's just a pretext. And I always like to tell people. Somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, she's just a mom." I'm like, no. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm a mom too, but they like insulted me with an MD and a JD after my name, and they just managed to insult me. So it has nothing to do with it. It's just like, that's why it's actually quite it's quite personal to them, because why would you have to do that? Why would you have to, negate somebody if it's just if it's just an intellectual scientific debate? Well, my goodness, this is very interesting. I don't think anybody's done a book like this, right?
I don't think so. This is actually, again, I mean, I've read over 150 books on vaccines, and I at one point was like, well, I think something is missing, because in all this information, and there's some fantastic books out there, of course, there's, apart from Dissolving Illusions, I couldn't find any book that really delved into history. So
Right.
that's why I was motivated to collect as many facts as I possibly could on vaccines. And I'm still not exhaustive, because it's such a massive industry worldwide, and we have over a century of data. And I have 1,200 entries specifically on vaccination in this book. And I wanted to create something that was like a reference book that people could flick through. They could check, like, if there's a certain decade that interests them, to see what happens. Also, to put other events that aren't necessarily related to vaccines, but to the medical evolution at the time, or policies that were being changed, or biological warfare. I mean, that comes into a lot the development in the military. So it helped connect dots for people, and then include, for instance, there's a summary of all the IOM reports, Institute of Medicine reports, of the safety of vaccines, summarize that in a way which is easily digestible for people, then look at the schedule development, how that's changed over history, and also do a timeline on the actual pharmaceutical industry itself, because that's what I started actually with. The timeline was on the pharmaceutical industry, because I wanted to follow, well, all these companies have been bought up. Well, who's taken their vaccine portfolio, and who have they sold certain products off to? And it was very convoluted. So I thought, okay, well, for myself, definitely wanted to put it into a format that was easily digestible. And I thought, well, why not share it? Because I haven't seen any kind of document like that about the pharmaceutical industry as well. So it helps better understand how this industry has developed, how they've, bought up portfolios, how they've merged with the biotech industry, how they all make deals between themselves and exchange licenses. And we like to think of them as competitors, but actually I would say they're more collaborators.
Right. Right. So I just want to give you my word that I am going to share your book with a few people who are in this space, specifically attorney Aaron Siri,
Ooh, yeah.
Del Bigtree from ICANN. They will, I know Bobby Kennedy, but he's got too much on his plate right now, but they will make sure that he also is aware of it. Also, Dr. Paul Thomas, you know Dr. Thomas? He wrote the
Yes.
book, the Vax Facts book, which is really more practical for patients. But I just think what you've done is absolutely tremendous, absolutely tremendous. You are a historian, and you're putting our history to good use. I just,
Thank
I
you.
just want to say thank you. I think what you've done is tremendous. I look
Well,
forward
thank
to
you very much.
looking at it. Thank you. So how can people, are you somebody are you on social? Do you want people to find you, or is that just not for you? I just want to.
I'm not very good with social media. I have to admit, I've been much more comfortable in the shadows for a long time, and have had to have kind of accept that, I have to put my face forward. Also, because I'm now president of our association, which is similar to Physicians for Informed Consent, but in Switzerland. I don't have any real social media presence. As I said, the website, so theultimatevaccinetimeline.com, will go live on the 4th of July. I'm working on a Substack. I only got one subscriber at the moment, because most of my mailing list is French speakers, but I'm writing this in English. So as soon as that is kind of like ready, and I've got some articles in there, I'm going to share it with people. But if anybody is interested, for now, there are a few articles. It's indieresearcher.substack.com. And otherwise, no, haven't got much social media presence, I'm
That's
afraid.
all right. Not everything. You've been busy. I'm looking forward. I want to see if I can introduce her to Del Bigtree. I think you would love to meet her. My goodness gracious. I just want to say thank you, Shaz Khan. You are absolutely an inspiration. Just put your head down, work, do what you are interested in. So for all the viewers out there, I get frustrated when people say, "I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer. What can I do?" I'm like, you could do whatever it is that's inside of you that you're drawn to do, and then just do it. And so you were drawn to understanding what happened to your father, and then you found inconsistencies, and you looked in the history of it, and you did research, and you just did it. And thank you. And I look forward to hearing more, about your work and about yourself. And I wish you Godspeed with the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and all the best with your book as well. I look forward to getting a copy of it soon.
That will be very fun. We didn't even talk about it because it's not relevant today, but it is Selective Persecution, the Legalization of American Fascism, and it is a page turner. So have a good rest of your day, Shaz.
Thank you. You too. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on the Gold Report today. I hope you've been inspired to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. Remember to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.